So you just got a new DSLR or mirrorless camera, or maybe you've had one lying around for a while, you have a spare capture card or even a new one, and you want to start using that as an upgrade from a webcam for your live streams. You've set it all up, but the image just doesn't quite look right or as good as you hoped it would be, and you're not really sure about what to do with all the settings. So that's what this video is for, to show you 3 simple ways that you can improve the image quality of your DSLR without having to know all of the crazy ins and outs of the camera. You don't need to learn of every single menu and setting in the camera or what each of these things we're talking about do to an absolute technical level. But if you do want to learn a little bit more about it, if you're looking to get into photography or vlogging or other types of filmmaking, I'll put some links in the description as well. To get a great image out of your camera, there's only 3 things that you really need to know and be aware of, and that is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. There are of course other things that come with that, like lighting, but for today we're going to talk about these 3 things because they're pretty much universal regardless of the camera that you have, and you can use these settings consistently between different cameras as well. Let's start with aperture. Aperture is how your lens controls how much light is passing through it and hitting the sensor. You may have heard the term iris or blades, and what that refers to is the internal mechanics of the lens closing down and opening up to control the amount of light coming through the lens. The lower the number of your aperture, the faster your lens is and the more light that it will let in, and it will also give you a shallower depth of field. The higher the number, the less light is passing in through your lens and the deeper the depth of field will be. Your lens will typically have the aperture written on it as an f-stop, so you may see something like f1.8, f2, f2.8, f4, and so on. Some lenses, like zoom lenses, will have a variable aperture depending on what zoom focal length that you're at. You may see this written as f3.5 to f5.6, and it just means as you zoom in, the image will get darker and the aperture will close down a little bit more. f2, f2.8, f4, and f5.6 are what are called full stops. These are generally good numbers to choose when choosing an aperture, just because it keeps things nice and simple. Every lens should be at least capable of hitting one of these numbers. At lower f-stops, your lens may be a little bit softer and not as tack sharp, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can give a nice aesthetically pleasing look to your image. It will also allow more light in, so if you don't have as many lights, it will make the image look brighter. And it will also give you that shallower depth of field that a lot of people like, that gives you that separation between you and the background, depending on what you need it for. f5.6 is really good if you have a lot of light or you want to have a deeper depth of field. Say if you have something behind you, you might want to have it a little bit more in focus so it's not completely blown out as bokeh. So you can choose these based on an aesthetic choice or just a practicality choice. But let's say you like how the image looks at f2.8, where it has a nice depth of field, but maybe it's a little too dark for the environment that you have and the lighting that you have. Well, we can achieve this look while retaining the depth of field of f2.8 by adjusting a setting in the camera called ISO. ISO refers to the sensitivity of the sensor in your camera. Usually your camera will have a native ISO, such as 400 or 800, that tells you how good it is in low light or just how sensitive it is. And as you increase that ISO, it makes the image brighter, but it can make it noisier as well. I would recommend looking at what the native ISO of your camera is. Set it to around 400 if you have a bright environment, or 800 if you don't have quite as many lights. You can push the camera up to ISO 1600, but anything beyond that, you're really adding a lot of noise to your image and it can start looking a little bit funky in colors. So I don't recommend going that high, but if absolutely necessary, you can. Last, and by no means least, we're going to talk about shutter speed. Shutter controls how many times per second the sensor is exposed to light coming in through your lens. Think of it like an eye blinking, and the more times that it blinks, the less light it lets in. The higher you raise your shutter, the darker the image will be, and the less motion blur that will be present in your image. A high shutter is how photographers get clean, sharp images of fast-moving animals or cars. The easiest way to set your shutter speed for video is to take whatever your frame rate is and double it. So for 30 frames a second, set your shutter speed to 1/60th of a second. For 60 FPS, use 120th of a second. I will add a caveat that for 60 frames a second, you probably want to use 1/25th of a second, because I found at 1/20th of a second, you will get flicker from lights. So for North America, if shooting at 60 FPS, you want to set your shutter speed to 1/25th. If you're in the EU, you're probably using either 25 frames a second or 50 frames a second, and you can use 1/50th of a second and 1/100th of a second as your shutter speed, respectively. So to put everything into practice of what we've talked about today, I've actually been using what I've been talking about for this video. I have my aperture set to f5.6. I have my shutter speed at 1/25th of a second because I'm shooting in 1080p 60. And I have my ISO set to 800, which the native ISO of my camera is 400, but I just wanted to add that extra stop of light. And the image doesn't look too bad. I mean, obviously I have a blank wall behind me, so that depth of field really doesn't make too much of a difference. But having it at f5.6 allows me that little bit of freedom to move back and forth without going out of focus. The image is bright and reasonably well exposed, and the motion looks correct because I doubled my frame rate. But that's it. Pretty much all cameras and lenses will allow you to change the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO regardless of the brand. So while my menus may differ to yours, they are a universal thing that you could use on pretty much any camera. As you've seen through this video, I showed you different examples of how it looks at the different f-stops, different ISOs, and shutter speeds. So hopefully you have enough information now that you can get a really good image from your setup. Obviously, lights and environment will make a difference. And if you want to see a video about lighting, then let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.